Alright everyone, so I have a little bit of a special treat for you, and what I want to do is I want to take you behind the scenes for what I do for my podcast. So for those of you who don't know, there's probably a lot of you about my podcast. For those of you who don't know, I want to explain a little bit about what I do. So my podcast is called the Da Vinci Mindset. So what exactly is the Da Vinci Mindset? The central theme for this mindset that I teach and what the overall theme for the podcast is always learning, growing, and expressing your creativity to achieve great things in life. So what I want to do is I want to bring you interviews with great achievers from all over the world. Entrepreneurs, business owners, executives, world changers, so that you can learn from their lessons in life and what they've achieved. But anyway, with that said, I've been interviewing about an hour. Look at the clock, it's going to be at 2:15 Eastern. And so what I want to do is I want to show you guys the preparation that I go through for each guest. So today, I have a special guest on. His name is Andrew Lassise, and I have his profile open on Facebook right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of basic research about Andrew, what he's been through, his story, and then we're going to come up with a couple of basic questions and themes to talk about during the podcast. So some of you might say that I'm kind of waiting to the last minute to come up with this information for the interview, but personally, I like doing it that way because the information, the research, and the questions are fresh in my mind. So I'm naturally curious about the person, and I have questions to ask, and I'm eager to learn. And that's probably my favorite part about doing the podcast so far, is just the opportunity to learn from different people all over the world, and I think this is a good way to do that. Alright, so anyway, let's get right into figuring out what we're going to talk about with Andrew today. So let me bring up our chat. And one of the things I do for my podcast is, before I actually have the people come on as guests, I typically look in Facebook groups just as a side note to find guests. It's a really easy way to do that if you're starting your own podcast. But I have a couple of qualifying questions that I ask them, just really basic ones. It's nothing too crazy. Just ask them a little bit about their story, what they want to talk about, and why they want to be on the show, just to see if they'll be a good fit. All right, so let me scroll up here, and I'll go through this process with you guys. All right, so I got my computer in front of the phone, so let me see. All right, here we go. Okay. So let me first tell you the specific questions that I wrote. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do? I think this is an important question just for, getting to know the personality of the person, what they've been through, and just to start figuring out a good way to introduce them and themes to talk about. And then why are you interested in being a guest on my show? That's pretty self-explanatory. All right, and those are just the basic questions I asked, nothing too crazy. Alright, so Andrew's a pretty interesting person. I already, spoiler alert, already read through his stuff, already know what he's been about. But I want to introduce you guys to, because I'm still going to learn more things. And now I'm really trying to see where these ideas take me and what I want to learn. Alright, so Andrew is an entrepreneur. And he started this entrepreneurial journey in his parents' basement 15 years ago at 16. So what I do is I have my notebook right now, and I'm going to keep track of the basic information in the first few lines, and then I'm going to come up with a set of 10 basic questions to go throughout the interview, just to guide the interview forward and to make sure that I provide listeners such as yourselves, if you guys listen to the show, as much value as possible. So we started this first business at 16. Okay. So he's a natural entrepreneur. I found that for a lot of entrepreneurs, they have the same kind of recurring theme in that they started pretty young. But there's always exceptions to every rule. All right. He's opened several companies, so he's a serial entrepreneur. I would say go big or go home. All right. And then his largest company is a remote IT company. And it just passed $10 million in sales. That's pretty impressive. I'm not at that point yet. I'm pretty far away, so hopefully I'll get there one day. But anyways, it's good that he has the experience. That's something we really want to learn from. Because when I hear things like that, he obviously knows a lot. He's had a lot of experience. So I know that, I'm naturally curious about that, and I want to learn about that. So I know that there's probably other people, maybe you yourself as well, you probably want to learn about that as well. So I think that's a good central theme to focus on. So entrepreneurial experience. And there's a lot of different things that we can go into that. We could go into the specific technical details of what he did in the business, or the entrepreneurial mindset, why he did it, what he's learned, things such as that. I really find those to be interesting questions to talk about during the interview. And then, so he has 30 employees in his largest company right now. Okay. And then he does leadership training through the John Maxwell program. Okay, let's see what else. So a little bit after that, once I just followed up with him to confirm the interview like a week or two later, he sent a little bit more information. So we'll go through that a little bit more. All right, so he has a podcast that's going to be launching soon called Sober Business Leaders. So, new podcast. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that on the show. I'm sure that would really be a good way to help him out and just something interesting for us to talk about. All right. Let me write that down. Okay. Very cool. So one of the interesting themes that he's kind of talking about in our conversation is he's passionate about kind of ready, fire, aim, and then always pivoting. And that means that you're always just constantly taking action to see if you took the right action, if that makes sense. That's a common theme that I've heard from many entrepreneurs who I've interviewed. So it's just something interesting, and I'm sure that's going to come up during the interview. Okay, and here's a little more information. So he's coming up on 6 years sober. All right. So his sort of niche is sobriety and entrepreneurship, which that makes sense for his new podcast, Sober Business Leaders, which I think is a great idea. Okay. So he started his first real company at 27. But he did start his first company probably as kind of an experimental thing at 16. So sober, 26. All right, so that's pretty much all we need to do for our research. I'm gonna write, okay, I already got the IT stuff on there. So that's enough. And what I try to do for my podcast interviews is I typically have 10 questions. And when I first started doing these interviews, when I didn't really have any experience, I kind of just created a set of 10 random questions without any structure or any order. But I found that after doing this over time, coming up with a couple of central themes to follow, either for the whole episode or for one half and then the second half, I think it's a great way to structure it and give it more order and just kind of let it flow a little bit more naturally. Because a lot of people out there, they come up with the questions, but they make it sound too robotic. So I've been really trying to find a fine balance between conversational and natural, and then the interview part where you're asking questions and getting information. And I think that's what really makes it entertaining and enjoyable to listen for people. So anyway, with that said, I want to come up with some central themes, and maybe you would come up with different themes than I would. Every person is different. So the one that really stuck out to me, which is the same for a lot of different interviews that I do, is entrepreneurial experience. So the thing about Andrew is he has a lot of experience. His business has just hit $10 million in sales. And so I think that's something that people would really like to learn from, to see what he's done and what he's doing. So entrepreneurial experience is definitely a huge one. And then I think that since his podcast is coming out soon and he has kind of a central theme of sobriety and entrepreneurship, I think that'll be another great theme for us to focus on. So we're gonna do that. Sobriety. I think since we already focused on entrepreneurial experience in the first half, we could either do sobriety and achievement or sobriety and entrepreneurship. Kind of two different takes on sobriety. So I'm trying to figure out if that would be good. I think we could do sobriety and achievement. I think that give a little bit more variety and that'd be a little more interesting. What do you think? Do you think, which would you pick? Sobriety / entrepreneurship or sobriety / achievement? Let me know down in the comments below what you would personally pick for this. I think for this episode, I don't know. I think we're going to go with sobriety and achievement since we're already talking about entrepreneurship in the first half. Alright, so there, we have our themes, our central themes for the episode of the podcast. And sometimes, depending on the guest or how much time we have, I'll make one theme or two themes, or sometimes even three themes. But I've really found two to kind of work best, just to give a little bit of variety for the audience, so it's a little more interesting, because my episodes typically go around the range of like 40 minutes to an hour, sometimes even longer than that, depending on how the guest is, like if they're naturally talkative and they want to go deeper, and sometimes there's time constraints as well. Entrepreneurs are super busy, so they don't always have the ability to go over. But anyway, with that said, when you have an episode of that length, it's a lot easier to have a couple of different things to focus on, just to keep it more interesting for the listeners who listen to the show. All right, so what we're gonna do now, we're gonna start coming up with the questions. So for my episodes, I always kind of follow the same order for the beginning and the end of the episodes. What I want to do for each episode is I always start off with giving the guest a chance to tell their own story from their own perspective and what they're doing right now. So the first question that I always ask is, "Hi Andrew." I don't typically say it exactly like this, but I say, "Why don't you start by telling us a little about yourself and what you're doing in the world?" So we're gonna write that as a question. "Hey Dougie, what you doing?" I'm recording a video. Do you want to be a guest in the video?
Yes, I do.
Hey, this is my girlfriend's brother, Dougie.
Hi.
He's a good man.
I'm a good old man.
He's a good old man. But anyway, right now what I'm doing is I'm recording a video for how I come up with my podcast interviews, the questions and everything. Do you have anything you want to say to the camera?
I just want to say Kenny's onto something big. Give him his love and support, and
Thank you,
keep
Dougie.
it awesome.
I appreciate
I'll be
that.
in another video another time.
Hey, we'll have him on as a future guest soon. Don't worry, guys. But anyway, so the first question we're going to ask is we're just going to ask the guest, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing in the world? So let me write that down. Okay. And I'm kind of slowing things down for the video. Usually you can do this in like 5 to 10 minutes, especially if you have your own podcast or if you want to start your own podcast. It's once you do it a couple times, it's a lot easier. All right. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself and what you're up to in the world? Because typically people really love to talk about themselves. So I think that starting off that way is a great way to do that. And my whole goal for the podcast is to get the guests to talk about their experiences in their lives. So it's a really good baseline question, and you can kind of let it naturally spring from there. Okay. Alrighty then. So what I do is I divide the show into 2 halves. There's 10 questions in total. So the first half is going to be about his entrepreneurial experience. So there's 1 question, kind of just a starter. So now we need 4 questions to ask about his entrepreneurial experience. Okay. So I got that. Now we need, then what's our second question going to be? I think it's good to get a little bit of order and consistency and structure in the questions that you create. So for the first one, let's say, we could always start with the why. Why did he get into entrepreneurship? I think that, going from why to what is a good way to do it. So, why? Let me think of a good way to phrase this. And if you guys would come up with different questions for this, or if you have any ideas that you would want to hear from them, different types of questions, let me know down in the comments below. But what our first question is going to be, why did you want to be an entrepreneur? Let's start with that. And sometimes when we go through the story in the first question, they answer that question, so usually what I would do in that case is I would put a little bit of a spin or a twist on that question. Okay. So we have 2 questions now. All right, great. Now we need a third question. Let me think. We could do, we have the why now. Now we want the what. So what are some things that he can provide provide the audience, like specific habits or techniques, things such as that. So I always create open-ended questions. If you're a podcast interviewer, you never want to give yes or no questions. Just always make open-ended questions, just so they have content to provide the audience and they provide as much value as possible. So what we could do, maybe we could say, what have been the most valuable habits for you to practice during your entrepreneurial career, which allowed you to be successful, which you don't have to make it as wordy, but something along those lines. So we could just say, what have been the most important habits for you to practice in entrepreneurship? I think that's a good one. We'll go with that. And then I'm going to actually use these questions in the podcast interview, so I'll make sure to put a link in the episode so that you can actually listen to these questions and how it actually turns into the episode after you watch this video. So, what are the most valuable habits for entrepreneurs to practice? I think that'll be a good question. What do you think? Maybe you disagree. All right. And I think habits are super important because habits, when you practice your habits, they determine your actions and your future. All right. But that's just a side note. All right, we got that. What's another one? And I don't, like, I have these questions, but I like to let it go naturally during the interview. If there's any, like, rabbit holes we go down, then I love letting it go down those, because if someone's passionate about something, you really want to focus on that. You know, they'll get more excited, they'll be more into the interview. So that's something I really kind of try to stress in my interviews, and sometimes I do a better job than others, but hey, it's just a part of the game. So now we need a fourth question. So we have the why question, and then the what, as in terms of the habits that he practiced. Now we need, maybe we could say, what's the skill that has been most helpful for you to develop? Something such as that. Let me think. One of the questions I like to ask during my interviews is, what's the most important lesson for you to learn? Or that you have learned. Sorry, I'm messing up my words. So we could say, I'm going to save that though. I'm going to save that for the last question of the first half. I don't like to throw that in the middle. I think it's a good way to kind of wrap things up for a section of your interview. But I think, okay, I got it. So we're going to throw him a scenario, and we're going to say, let's say we have a new entrepreneur who has no experience at all. What advice would you give them? I think that's a good question. I always love throwing scenarios at that because it's practical, and I can guarantee that there's a lot of inexperienced or new entrepreneurs who listen to it. So it's directly valuable for them. So I'm going to write that down. All right, so let's say we have... And sometimes I'll write these questions on a notebook, sometimes on paper. If I'm doing a video interview, I'll write it on the computer so that I can have it up there and I can read the questions from the screen or the introduction that I create as well, so that you can't really see that I'm writing from a notebook. So I just find that to be helpful. So okay, let's continue writing the question anyway. So let's say we have a new entrepreneur. All right. What advice would you give them? And some of these questions I ask a lot of guests, and it's very interesting to see the different answers that you'll get. But I do try to customize them for the specific guests. Okay. Then, of course, it does depend on the guest and their experience as well. Okay, and then the last question I'm just going to ask is, I think it's a good way to see, you know, the first thing that comes to the mind is interesting. What's the most important lesson you've learned in entrepreneurship? I like questions like that. Maybe you disagree, but I think it's just interesting to hear what people say. All right. Okay, almost done. I feel like I'm writing super slow, so sorry if this is taking a while, but I hope you guys find it interesting. All right, great. All right, so we have our first half of the questions. And so what I'm going to do, I hope you guys get the gist of coming up with these questions. But another thing that I do for my podcast interviews, I'm going to come up with the last 5 questions off camera. But another important thing that I do for my interviews is I come up with an introduction specifically for each guest. And I don't do anything too crazy. I just give like a high-level view of what they're doing and what they've done, just to create a nice little introduction for each guest. So I'm going to write, let me see. All right, so we want Andrew Lasse's introduction. And if you have experience in copywriting or things such as that, it's really beneficial for when you make introductions or questions such as this, just to grab the listener's attention and take them through a story, which I'm still getting better at. My introductions have gotten a lot better since I first started, but you know, I still have improvements to do for it. All right, so Andrew Lasse. All right, so what we're gonna do for an interview and introduction, the first line, you really want to grab their attention. You want to speak to the listener. So we could do, are you a new entrepreneur who wants to reach the next level? Something like that. I mean, I don't know about that one. That's just the first one that came to my mind. I think we can do better though. What do you think? How about, let me think. A lot of this is just thinking. And I feel like since I'm recording it right now, might be coming into a little bit of writer's block, but you know, let's just start with that. That's the first thing that came to my mind. So, are you an entrepreneur? Or how about we do you want to achieve great things in life? I like starting with questions, because then they'll think, yeah, I do want to achieve great things in life. All right. So we're going to write that down. And we can just say, do you want to achieve great things? I don't think you really need to have in life in there. It's kind of self-explanatory. And then the next line, it's kind of like when you're writing these words, when you're copywriting, you're just pretty much taking them through a story, a sequence. So do you want to achieve great things? We could always do another question. Do you want to learn from someone who has the experience that you're looking for? So we'll do that. We'll do a double question. So what I like to do is I like to do a short hook introduction just to kind of grab their attention and their interest. And then what I do is I transition into the specific guest and tell them a little bit about the guest. I don't go too in depth because I really want to give the guest a chance to tell them about themselves, and so that I personally can learn a little more. Because I think that's something interesting that I personally do is I don't do a ton of like in-depth research on each guest just because I want to learn about them throughout the interview. Maybe you disagree. I'm sure there's other ways to do it, like I could do more, but I just personally think I just like doing it this way. Tell me what you think down below. Do you think I should do more research or create a more in-depth intro? And it's fine if you disagree. Everyone has their own things. But anyway, do you want to learn from someone with extensive experience? Well, today's your chance. I like that. All right. If you had to make an introduction, what would you write for it? Let me know down in the comments below. I'm interested to see what you guys come up with. Well, today's your chance. Today I'm bringing you a special guest. All right. I feel like I write so slow right now. Today I'm bringing you a special guest whose name is Andrew Lassise. And trust me, it's a lot faster when you write this stuff without speaking about it or narrating. Just trust me, once you do it a few times, it becomes, rapid fire. Special guest his name is Andrew Lassise. I think the points we want to cover are his entrepreneurial experience, because that's the theme. You want to build your introduction from the theme that you create. So, all right. Andrew has extensive experience in the field of entrepreneurship. All right. For instance, since I'm doing an episode about entrepreneurship and sobriety and achievement, I wouldn't make an introduction about basket weaving or the mystic arts or something like that. It doesn't make sense, and you want to grab their attention. So Andrew has he has extensive experience in entrepreneurship, where he owns 3 businesses. I was checking the time to make sure I'm not late I still got like 35 minutes, so we're good. 3 businesses. So Andrew's largest business is at $10 million, so I want to focus. I want to put that in there. I'm trying to think of it. Okay. And then I want to give a little bit of a peek about what exactly we talk about during the interview. So what I'm going to do, just past $10 million in sales. And then today, I want to talk about what specifically we're going to talk about. And sometimes, our conversation can take, different twists or turns. So I just come up with a high-level view of what we're going to do. Today we'll talk about the following. So, how to be a successful entrepreneur. That's going to be one we're going to talk about. And then I create bullet points for these. Like when I do the copywriting for social media posts, when I list off the things we're going to talk about, I try to create bullet points. How to be a successful entrepreneur. Greatness. So that's kind of the basic introduction that I've created. So I'm excited. And then I kind of wrap things up by just, foreshadowing like what we're going to do. So I just say something like, I'm very excited for this interview today. I can't wait to see what we're going to learn. And then I introduce the guest. And then obviously when you're saying these words, you really want to show through the tone of your voice and your tonality. Well, those are the same things, of course. that you're actually excited and that you're actually curious about the person. It's very important. Because if you sound curious and they hear that, you're going to make the other person curious as well. So I'm excited too. Alright, so let me read you what I have so far. Let me read our introduction, and sometimes I'll make a few changes to it depending on how it sounds. But anyway, here we have. So this is our introduction for Andrew Lassis. Do you want to achieve great things? Do you want to learn from someone with extensive entrepreneurial experience? Well, today is your chance. Today I am bringing you a special guest whose name is Andrew Lassis. Now, Andrew has extensive experience in entrepreneurship, where he owns 3 businesses, where his largest business, Rush Tech Support, has just passed $10 million in sales. Today, we're going to talk about the following. Let me give you a sneak peek. How to be a successful entrepreneur. How Andrew went from addicted to sober to entrepreneur. And how to achieve greatness in your life or your business. I'm very excited to speak with Andrew today, and I hope that you're ready and excited to learn from his lessons as well. So without any further ado, let's welcome Andrew to the show. Welcome, Andrew. How are you doing today? So that's typically how my introductions go, and as I was speaking it, I kind of changed the words up just to let it flow a little bit, because when I hear it out in my brain, it sounds way different than it actually does on paper or out loud. I guess that's a better way to say it. But anyway, that's kind of the general process that I go through for preparing for my podcast interviews. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video today. I hope you learned something, and I hope you got some insights. But anyway, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go get ready with the last 5 questions for this interview. Then I'm going to actually do the interview. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to actually hear the interview and hear how all these things turned out, and if the introduction sounds the same as I just did it, then you can check out the link in the description below and listen to this episode of the podcast. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to follow along on my entrepreneurial journey as I make these podcasts, as I build my business, and as I keep learning and growing so that you can learn from the same lessons as well. So it's Kenny here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.